About even more on the religions of science, or getting from the do to you via the zoo. Okay, we're going to talk about micro and macro evolution. Okay, so first let's define what evolution is. Okay, it is the change in the gene pool of a population from generation to generation by such processes as mutation, natural selection, and genetic drift, which affects fitness. Okay, one of the most important words here is actually fitness. That is the big deal. Fitness is the ability for an organism to pass its genes to the next generation. Okay, your fitness level is a measurement of how well you can procreate. Okay, if you can't produce babies, you can't pass on your genes. Okay, which means evolution does nothing. Okay, that's the big deal there. In the World English Dictionary and biology, they define it as a gradual change in the characteristics of a population of animals or plants over successive generations. Accounts for the origin of existing species from ancestors unlike them. Okay, interesting little caveat there. So let's look at, since they see also natural selection, I went to natural selection. Okay, the process by which forms of life having traits that better enable them to adapt to specific environmental pressures, such as predators, changes in the climate, or competition for food or mates, will tend to survive and reproduce in greater numbers than others of their kind, thus ensuring the perpetuation of those favorable traits in succeeding generations. Okay, this is what Darwin actually said. Okay, this is real. Natural selection is a very real system. We see it all the time. Okay, cute girls don't usually go for really fat guys. Okay, and really fat guys don't always live all that long. So that would be a process of natural selection. Okay, and likewise we see that in the wild. So we'll move on from there. A few key points before we move on to micro and macro. Okay, the most important thing is to know that evolution is a blind process. Okay, there is no designer in it. Okay, just because a trait would be handy, okay, to have, or it would aid in the survival, does not have anything to do with the appearance of a mutation in the gene pool. Okay, because rats wanted to fly doesn't mean they become bats. Okay, that's basically what that means. It's not a, boy, I wish I could fly, and then 1,000 generations later you can fly. That's not how it works. It's a random process, and the random mutation has to be advantageous enough that it leads to an increase in fitness, and that increase in fitness allows you to pass that new mutation on to the subsequent people. Okay? Only those mutations that can be transmitted to the next generation without successive penalty to fitness are viable. Okay? Those are nice big words that basically mean that, like I said, if you can't pass it to your babies, it's not a viable mutation. This is particularly interesting because that means the mutation cannot basically be one that is effective anywhere else in the body. Okay, the mutation has to occur within the egg or the sperm for sexually reproducing animals. Okay, it can't just be like a mutation in Nick's brain. Okay, that makes him really smart and glow in the dark. Okay, if he can't pass it on to his babies, it's not a viable gene for any purpose whatsoever. Okay. The other thing that we need to know about is Occam's razor. Okay, who knows Occam's razor? He's a wonderful tool of science. Okay, basically states that among competing hypotheses, the hypothesis with the fewest assumptions should be the selected hypothesis. This is not a law; it's just a good rule of thumb. Okay, basically what it means is the simplest solution is probably the correct solution. Okay, scientists use this all the time to basically keep their wild ideas in check. Somewhere along the line, somebody forgot about it. So, but anyways, they taught it to me in college, but I think the professor wasn't paying attention to his own notes or something. So, a brief discussion on systematics. Who's know what systematics is? Come on, you should know what systematics is. Okay, systematics is basically how we organize living creatures into their groups. Okay. Typically, you'll see this is going to be some nice 7th grade science here. So K, P, C, O, F, G, and S leads my favorite mnemonic, which is teens play chess on fat girls' stomachs. Okay? So The K is for kingdom. The P is for phylum. The C is for class. The order, you laugh, I've remembered this for 20 years just because of that. The O is for order, the F is for family, the G is for genus, and the S is for species, okay? An example might be a kingdom of Animalia, a phylum of Chordata, the class of Mammalia, the order of Carnivora, the family of Ursidae, the genus of Ursus, and the species of Arctos. Yes, which bear? No. Now, you normally list it by genus species, so you'll see Ursus arctos, nice Latin words, okay? This is actually a common brown bear, okay? Now, you can have subspecies like the Ursus arctos horribilis. Does anybody know what the Ursus arctos horribilis is? Grizzly bear, good job. You're the man. So, let's talk about microevolution. It's the evolutionary change involving the gradual accumulation of mutations, positively affecting fitness, leading to new varieties within a species, observed over a short period of time. And this can lead to speciation, okay? So, this right here, you've all heard of Darwin's finches, right? It's one that we watched that video a couple weeks ago. They talk a lot about Darwin's finches. These are Darwin's finches, okay? Basically, he went to the Galapagos, and the Galapagos is made up of a bunch of crazy islands, okay? But they're fairly well isolated from each other. And basically, the idea was that one population of finches arrived in the Galapagos, got separated by storms and stuff, and finches can't fly too terribly far, so they're not able to, basically, the populations don't ever meet again, and they never get together and have fun and make babies. So what comes down is that the different environments have different types of food, different seeds, cactuses versus fruit and things like that, which can lead to different generations of beak bills, okay? So what happens is at one point in time there'll be a mutation that one bird has a longer bill than another bird, but he can eat better, so his fitness is higher, and he can reproduce better, okay, which allows that to basically move down the chain until all of his kids have longer beaks, and so on and so forth. It's called selective pressure, okay? We can see this type of stuff today, okay? I was taught by a scientist at UCR that was actually considered to be the guy that found the proof of modern microevolution, and he did it in a series of pools in Africa. Really fascinating study. But what happens is speciation is when this difference of the beak and stuff eventually gets to the point where if those populations do meet, they cannot basically mate, okay? The basic definition of a species is defined by whether or not you can mate with another member of the same species, okay? If you can't make viable offspring, you're not in the same species. Basic idea. Okay, so that's what's called speciation. We've seen it happen. It can be easy stuff like all of a sudden the birds, they change what times of the year they reproduce and stuff like that. Or they change their color of their feathers, and now the girls from the one population don't like the boys from the other population and stuff like that. So it really can be pretty simple stuff. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. What's interesting about this, which actually have discovered that all of these beak length differences are because of one protein. The more protein that occurs in the embryo, the longer the beak is. And the less of it is, the shorter it is. So it's actually all controlled pretty much by one protein cycle, which is especially interesting since the Lord made it that way. It's like a knob. He turns it one direction, then they get longer. He turns it the other way, they get shorter. All right. If I was building it, that's how I'd do it. So, it's also things like, whether or not you can hide. So we got a moth here that's hiding on a tree. The one thing that might affect your fitness is whether or not you have a mutation that creates better camouflage. Okay. If you have better camouflage, you don't get eaten. If you don't get eaten, you can probably procreate. Okay. That's a big difference. So, let's move on to the wonderful concept of macroevolution, okay? They believe that major evolutionary transition from one type of organism to another occurring at the level of the genus and the higher taxa, okay? This is basically the goo to you via the zoo argument, okay? So what happens is, this is a wonderful poster that's it's only in German. I can only find it in German. But I don't know why it's not in English anywhere. But it's the best example of what it is. But basically, it's the whole, we had the Earth formation and the tidal pools and protein soup and all that jazz got together and created functional organisms that differentiated into all these different ideas. And then what I like about this is it comes up here to salamanders, to triceratops, to goats, to chickens, to Adam and Eve, and she's actually holding an apple. I'm really not sure what bright guy came up with this thing. It's a crazy sense of humor, I tell you what. So, to summarize micro and macro, okay, so we got our taxa, right? Microevolution occurs on the species level only, okay? Like the guy said in the video, the finches stay finches, okay? The fish stay fish, the snail stay snail. You don't get crazy stuff going on. It deals with changes on a small scale, which can eventually lead to speciation in some circumstances, i.e. different types of dogs, okay? You can consider some dogs different species inherently because it's hard to mate Chihuahuas with Great Danes. Okay, it doesn't work out well. That would be something that would be considered a separate species. You can get macroevolution, though, applies to all the other levels on the tree. Okay, it changes on a massive scale, leading to a different type of animals altogether. Okay, i.e., fish turning into dogs. Okay, that would be macroevolution. So let's talk about a few of the problems, okay? One of the greatest problems is the sheer lack of evidence of modern animals evolved from a distantly different ancestor over the course of millions of years. We should be able to see it in the fossil record, okay? There should be at least thousands, if not millions, of examples of fossils documenting the gradual evolution from one physical state to another. The truth, however, is that the fossil record fails to support the notion of evolutionary gradualism in any way, shape, or form. Okay, the fact is that most species exhibit no change during their tenure upon the Earth. They appear in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. Okay, now what's interesting about this particular statement is this was made by possibly one of the most famous archaeologists of all time, a Harvard PhD paleontologist by the name of Stephen Jay Gould. Wrote thousands of papers and tons of books. He's the go-to guy in paleontology. He said, I don't understand, is basically what he said, but he's an evolutionist. Man. See, he forgot his Occam's razor too. Another fact that he said, species suddenly appear. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by the steady transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed. And he's still an evolutionist. Okay. Now, some people tend to call these people Darwinist. I personally don't like the term Darwinist because I think Darwin gets a bad rap. Darwin had an idea and he put it on paper. There's nothing wrong with putting an idea on paper. Okay. He didn't say that God didn't make it. He just said he couldn't understand his understanding of how God made the universe versus what he saw. There's nothing wrong with that. He raised a few questions. Okay. My problem is these people are actually evolutionists because they believe evolution created the universe as we know it today, and Darwin did not necessarily believe that at all. Okay, he just had an idea. So, some things there. Dr. Colin Patterson, who was a senior paleontologist at the British Natural History Museum, is an evolutionist, a fossil expert. He wrote a very significant book on evolution. Someone asked him why he did not show in his book any of the in-between or transitional forms when he wrote the book, and he answered back in the following manner. He said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. You suggest that an artist should be able to and used to visualize such transformations. But where would he get the information from? I could not honestly provide it, and if I were to leave it into an artistic license, would it not mislead the reader? I wrote my text I wrote the text of my book 4 years ago, and if I were to write it now, I think it would, the book would be rather different. Gradualism is a concept I believe in, and not just because of Darwin's authority, okay, which, how he gets authority in that I don't know, but because my understanding of genetics seems to demand it. Yet, as the famous expert Stephen Jay Gould said, and the American Museum people are hard to contradict when they say there are no transitional fossils. As a paleontologist myself, I am very much occupied with the philosophical problems of identifying ancestral forms in the fossil record. And you say that I should at least show a photo of the fossil for which each type of organism was derived, and I will lay it on the line. There is no such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. To me, he basically says I'm full of hogwash, don't listen to me, but I don't know. Yeah. And there was an interesting counter-argument I read because somebody got real angry that creationists used that argument against the guy, because that guy is actually very famous for saying stupid stuff in a room with creationists. Okay. He really does say things like the fossil record is total hogwash and stuff like that with creationists in the room, and everybody goes, and then he comes back and says, well, I didn't mean it. I was talking to scientists about a very specific problem. But he really does have some interesting things to say. If you ever get a chance, look him up.